Bienvenido. If you are able, please share this show with a friend, leave us a nice review on the podcast player of your choice, or if you'd like to support us financially, sign up for the companion podcast, The St. Nicholas Project, on Gum Road. All these things really help us out. Namaste.
Hello, friend. The Mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Sumo, are you there?
Nobody knows where eels come from. Nobody knows. It's an unknown. I lied awake last night thinking about it a lot. But I couldn't come up with any answers.
About eels and where they come from?
Yeah, no one knows. Nobody knows where eels come from. That's true. No one has ever seen freshwater eels reproduce or mate or lay eggs or any of that, despite centuries of trying.
What happens if you try to breed them in captivity?
They don't do it. They don't do it. No one's ever seen a baby eel be born. No one has ever seen any of it ever happen. And yet this is not worldwide news. We talk about dumb stuff like Afghanistan.
I mean, if this is true, like, scientists around the world are totally wrecked right now for not already solving this.
It is true that the eels are a big problem. So much so that Aristotle believed they just were spontaneously generated from mud.
Mud creatures.
Because they don't even really have sex organs. Most of their whole, they think they found them now because people have been working on this problem. But Sigmund Freud actually was like the first guy to find eel testicles.
Okay.
Allegedly.
So he dissected one.
He dissected hundreds of eels, cutting them apart. This is why you shouldn't trust Sigmund Freud. All these people are weird when you start digging into them. He used to cut up eels. He said some quote like, my nightmares are stained with the blood and white flesh of sea creatures that I have dissected.
Ugh.
And he did this in searching for eel testicles, which he later claimed was a manifestation of his own search for his own manhood.
But yeah, of course it was.
Right?
I mean,
because
Freud.
he's creepy and weird,
Yeah.
and he thought everyone wanted to kill their father and have sex with their mother. You shouldn't trust anything Sigmund Freud ever said.
True.
He was a creepy guy.
Even Carl Jung couldn't put up with him.
Yeah, for good reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, no one. But it turns out, they think that the problem with the eels is that the eels have 5 life stages, at least 5.
Whoa.
Like, you know how frogs become tadpoles and then frogs?
Yeah.
Eels have that 5 times. So they have 5 different metamorphoses where they look like totally different animals. They never grow legs or anything, but they look like one time they're like sort of transparent and they're like a glass eel. Another time they're a silver eel and they have big eyes. Another time they're like these little bitty tadpole things.
Mm-hmm.
They have 5 different distinct forms. that they pass through, right? Boom,
Okay.
boom, boom. And then no one really connected for a long time to the same animal. But only in the last stage do they apparently grow sex organs after they dissolve their stomachs. So the whole time they were ever in Europe, where Aristotle was, and all the medieval scholars thinking about the eels, they never had any sex organs at all, because they only do this, apparently, with the freshwater eels spend a year of their life swimming down from the rivers into the ocean, and then they go all the way to like this deep spot off the coast of South Carolina, where they think maybe they breed.
Wow.
And they die. They use their fat reserves on the way there because they've dissolved their stomachs, and then they breed there. They think maybe, but that they only think that's because that's where the smallest eels are ever found.
Okay.
But they never have seen it happen, and they've never seen any of it ever work. And they've tried to electroshock female eels to induce ovulation and all this stuff. Nothing.
Weird.
It's a big problem. It's a big problem. And if anyone can solve the eel question, it's been plaguing us for 2,000 years, literally. And I think it's more important than the Jew question or the flat Earth question, or by the Jew question I mean who is the real Jews? Obviously,
Right.
not all, because so many people claim to be the real Jews, including the people in Israel right now. But there's a lot of black people in America that disagree.
They
They
are
the real Jews. And I was interestingly, I learned the other day that they may have some more backing to that than I imagined.
No, please.
Because
the Hebrew
yes.
Israelite guys, the black Hebrew Israelites.
Well, not the idea that there were black Jews in the ancient Bible times is probably accurate.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that these guys running around in vacation Bible school gear in the streets of New York City are those same people is very slim. But their position is that actually blacks would. But I actually learned that if you look at the linguistics of like those the tribes and stuff, like the 12 tribes, one of them is heavily connected to the same language groups of sub-Saharan Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some black people there, who genetically test out as being Jews.
Wow. So what does this do to the Hamite / Japhethite question?
Good question. I'm not sure. I think that Moses, of course, had a black wife,
right?
Because he invaded Ethiopia as a prince of Egypt. Are you aware?
Yes.
Right. So as a prince of Egypt, the tradition holds before he rebelled against Pharaoh, he fought for Pharaoh as one of the princes of Egypt and went down into Ethiopia.
Yep.
Conquered a lot of it, married an Ethiopian queen, right? So maybe that's where it's from. Who knows?
Interesting.
Who knows? But I do know no one knows where eels come from. And no one is really, everyone's looking at Pangea backwards.
Backwards?
Well, have you looked at, describe Pangea for me?
It's a collection
you know what
of
Pangea is? What is Pangea, listener?
Pangea is a collection of the continents all squished together, assuming a model of plate tectonics where they expand in the area of the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, they don't expand. Good foreshadowing. They drift.
They drift via tectonic plate movement.
And why do people think this happens?
Am I still doing the audience, or can I be me again?
You can be you.
Okay. They think this happens because of convection currents of molten magma.
No. I mean, like, why do people go, oh yeah?
I don't know. I don't. I don't understand the question.
Because the things look like they fit together. The continents.
Oh, right. Yeah. Puzzle
Right?
piece.
Like
yeah.
South America looks like it fits in the little.
Yeah, you
armpit
can
of
squish them
Africa.
together in a nice little pattern and
Yeah,
make
they
a
do,
supercontinent.
don't they?
Yeah.
They fit together, and everyone accepts this. But have you ever noticed that if you do it the other direction, it works out the same also? If
No,
you move
I've never
the
noticed that.
Americas across the Pacific Ocean, they fit very snugly into the side of. They can spoon Asia, Australia, no problem.
Interesting. Well,
And then
that brings up a problem.
It does bring up a problem, doesn't it? And in fact, if you put this on a computer and you put all the continents on a ball, and you make sure and you have a constraint that the continents, they can rotate, but they can't shrink in size.
Mm-hmm.
But the water can go away if necessary, right?
Okay.
And you start shrinking the diameter of the Earth. You start. You will find that on both the west side and the east side, and the north side and the south side, when you include Antarctica and all that stuff, the continents sort of all fit together like a puzzle piece on every side.
Whoa.
So what does that mean? Does that mean we live on an expanding Earth?
That'd be pretty awesome if we did.
Like the Earth is constantly expanding, and somehow the things are breaking apart, and the Earth is getting larger and larger and larger. I don't know. The Earth does say they believe the Earth gains mass every year, quite a lot because of stuff falling into it. But I don't know. I'm pretty low key today because I'm lying in a bed.
You're physically lying in a bed?
Yeah, I'm lying in a bed today because my back was hurting a bit.
Oh, man.
So it's okay. But today I just has been drained laughing at the Taliban.
Oh, man.
I've my life force. I've just been drained laughing at the Taliban. I was talking with the Taliban.
Oh, are you guys tight?
Well, I'm not tight, really. But, I tweeted that Taliban tweet.
Uh-huh.
That took off.
Yeah.
And then the Taliban guy who tweeted the tweet. So a Taliban guy tweeted a meme, and it was funny. And I screen capped it and posted it. And then a lot of people talked about it. So much so that he eventually saw it, and then he tweeted back at me. And he was like, you know what? Our camels also don't like you guys. And he tweeted me a little movie of a camel kicking a U.S. person.
Oh, no.
He was trying to pet it. And so now I have this sort of Twitter Taliban contact.
So you may actually get your interview, and we will get sent to Gitmo.
He said, I said, do you want to do an interview? And he said, I will thank you for asking. I will discuss later. That's what he said. He said, thanks for asking. We'll discuss about it later. So maybe there will be a Taliban interview.
Oh, man.
Coming up. Who knows? But I've just been watching them throw Waifu pillows off buildings and troll Joe Biden by eating ice cream and drive bumper cars around.
They're throwing Waifu
They look
pillows.
like they're having a great time. This is not a pro-Taliban show. I think we were very clear in the early episodes. This is not a terrorist organization.
Indeed. Still our policy.
And nor do we support other terrorist organizations, right? We're not pro-terrorist.
Right.
We're also I don't think we're actively anti-terrorist either, though.
We're like neutral observers. Is that what you're saying?
We're just like observers.
I don't know. I'm anti-terrorist.
Huh?
I'm anti-terrorist. I'll stake
that
that claim.
In the age of like George Floyd,
Yeah.
it's not enough to just be not racist. You have to be anti-racist, right? But that's it turns out that's actually a lot of work.
Okay.
Right? And if that means the same for terrorism.
Oh, so that implies I have to go out and beat up terrorists to be
I think
anti-terrorist.
that is what that implies in this day and age. And I don't have the energy to go out and I don't know, anti-terrorist.
Well, neither does the U.S. government, apparently. So you're in good company.
Yeah, but because being anti-racist is you gotta do a lot of psychological work.
Mm-hmm.
Think about your privilege.
Yeah,
but I can't. I don't have the mental space left after being so anti-racist to also go on that same path. My emotional labor is already quite high.
Yeah, you can only do so much.
What they're asking me to do.
Yeah.
So it's like being anti-sexist, which I also am.
Mm-hmm.
That requires a lot of work, and I can't be anti something else if now anti means I have to actively be against it.
I see what you're saying.
Because I think actually, if you're asking people to be anti-terrorist, that is quite a lot to ask, because that I think involves forming counter-terrorist agencies and then going to fight them in combat.
I mean, we probably have some listeners that would sign up for that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, but I'm not, like I said, my back hurts.
Yeah, well,
I'm not ready to go
see the chiropractor and
fight the Taliban, right? I can interview a Taliban member,
right?
But I'm not, like I said, we're not pro-Taliban, but we're also not so anti that I'm going to get up and go fight them.
Right. They are in Afghanistan.
They're also far away, right? So I'm not gonna. What do you want me to do?
I figure we've got problems a little closer in proximity than that.
What do you want me to do, listener? Why are you complaining to me to go stop the Taliban? I didn't do it. Why do you want me to stop them? What did I do?
Well, we did. I mean, we did sort of create and fund them.
I didn't.
I mean,
I've given no money to the Taliban.
By we, I mean the CIA.
Well, the CIA, yeah. But if I give money to you, and then you give it to ISIS or Sinn Féin or whatever that dumb thing was in Ireland. What was that called? Sinn Féin or something?
Sinn Féin.
Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Such a stupid name.
Yeah. Well, Gaelic.
Yeah, the Irish can't even do terrorism properly. I mean, the Troubles were so lame as far as terrorism goes. I mean, they blew up a couple buildings sometimes.
Yeah, everybody gets really dramatic about the Troubles.
It's like, oh yeah, we had Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah, he outdid all you Irish nerds.
He blew up a building.
Yeah.
Well,
supposedly.
That's how an American does something. Sinn Féin, Shin Gay would occasionally just blow up a van or whatever.
Right. But they wore they wore tweed.
They were just
looked cool.
Yeah, and they wore those stupid masks. They would always wear ski masks. Timothy McVeigh was like, listen, we're about a manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually gonna be pretty good and make a lot of solid points, and then I'm gonna blow up the building.
Right.
So everything is America does everything better.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we lose wars, we do it in an epic fashion.
Man, that's the truth.
I mean, I think in the losing of this war, we set the world record for the number of people clinging to the outside of an airplane.
Yeah.
So
I mean, how many fell off of that one plane?
Epic.
3 people fell off of that one plane. That's got to be some kind of record.
Yeah, no one has ever killed as many people by trying to run away from them in an airplane as we have.
Yeah.
And saying, no, you can't come on the airplane. We will now leave you to be killed by the enemies we have fought and funded and promised to protect you from. Now we will fly away. Goodbye. And so that's just where we are. And I think that our interview with the Taliban is going to be great if it happens. I don't know. Ow.
I don't want to go to Gitmo, dude. Just.
Well, I don't think I looked into it. I don't think it's illegal to talk to the Taliban.
Yeah.
Or a Taliban member.
That's true.
I mean, I could be wrong. I don't think I am. I looked it up. I typed in Google, is it illegal to talk to the Taliban?
Mm-hmm.
And Google said no.
Okay.
Or at least it didn't have an opinion about it.
Right.
Today we're going to talk about How to Lie with Statistics. Have you read this book?
No. It's been recommended to me many times, though.
It's a great book. It's a great book. Everyone, I think it should be mandatory reading, actually, in our day and age. You know what I didn't do?
What didn't you do?
Turn my voice sound. I'm gonna turn that on. Hold on. Okay. We're gonna break down a lot of stuff here. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Let's just. I think we should just go into the problems with the averages,
mm-hmm.
and then maybe we'll talk about Australia afterwards.
Okay.
So, the How to Lie with Statistics is a book written in the 1950s, 1959, actually. And what you find reading the book is that everybody everything has always been the same forever, and nothing is new under the sun. And the mistakes people make today are the same they made then. I'm going to read you a little excerpt here. He's talking about I'm not going to read the excerpt, I'm going to explain. He's talking about his father-in-law. He was having an argument with him, and he said, there's a lot of crime around here, his father-in-law said, when he moved from Iowa to California. And that was true if he read the newspaper. And the author of this book said, my father-in-law's conclusion was statistical in an informal way. It was based on a sample, just a biased one that happened to be in the newspaper. So he said, look, it just so happens that in California they covered crime a lot more often than they did in Iowa. But actually, when I went back and looked at it per capita, it was not much difference. And that is, like many, it assumed, so a statistical thing was guilty of a process called semi-attachment, which is where you assume that one thing proves another thing. In other words, the amount of times crime is written about implies the amount of times crime happens.
Right.
Right? And so you see this, you saw that then in 1959, you see that today when it's like the number of times people write about white cops attacking black people is the number of times that it happens. And so if they write about it more, it must be happening more.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Same thing. Back then, people think, if we write more about gun shootings, there must be more gun shootings happening. If we write less about it, there's less about it. That's semi-attachment because you have the actual statistic you have is the number of articles, and you assume that means the other thing, but it doesn't. It has really nothing to do with it, right? A lot of people, and that's the thing. A lot of people are thinking rationally in a way about COVID stuff and race stuff and economic, but they just have really incredibly bad data,
right,
given to them. Like I said, in the case of BLM or terrorism, the news reporting has almost no correlation to it happening in actuality. A few winters ago, this is this guy talking again. He says, a few winters ago, investigators reported figures of antihistamine pills. Each showed a considerable percentage of colds cleared up after treatment. So antihistamines, which are now used for allergies, right, were originally developed and used in the 50s and 40s as cold procedures, like to clear up a cold.
Mm-hmm.
And they all would tout like, we've cleared this. All this clears the cold up, right?
Right.
And there was a medical product boom for antihistamine treatments to treat the common cold. But as he says, as a comedian pointed out, proper treatment will cure a cold in 7 days, but left to itself, it will hang on for a week. And so all that was happening when people went back and looked at the data, like decades later, which is why they no longer use antihistamines when you have a cold at the doctor's office.
Yep.
Now they just throw you in a COVID ward.
Right.
They put you on a ventilator and kill you.
Yeah.
That's all they do now. Used to they give you used to they gave you Benadryl. Then for a period of time they did nothing and said to go home and wait it out. And now they say, let us murder you.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, yes, please do murder me.
Just as an aside, I cannot believe that we're still using ventilators on people.
It's crazy. It's completely unjustifiable. People have gone insane. I suspect this is the apocalypse. I don't know if it's like more and more. What it is, it's feminine World War III.
Oh, man.
So there was World War I and II, which were masculine wars. Then World War III is like death by safety. Like everyone take care of everybody else.
Yeah.
To the point that, because the male version is like we get really angry and then you want to kill everybody.
Right.
And then now that the polar has switched on the battery from male to female in society, now you have feminine World War III where we're going to kill everybody to keep them safe.
We're literally being smothered to death by nurses.
Yeah. Right. By nurses. And it's just, it's like, listen, you have a cold. I'm going to now, just to keep you and everyone else safe, I'm going to smother you.
Right.
And cut off your ability to breathe.
Yeah.
And that's really what they're doing in many cases. But anyway, so antihistamines went through and they were like, yeah, we did a great job with colds. And it turned out that wasn't true at all. And they dropped it. Right. And I suspect that's true of most COVID stuff too, like ivermectin.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're just giving it to you and then you get better anyway and they're like, look, it increased 70% of patients. That's great. It's like, yeah, but also COVID, this is all on the assumption that COVID is a death sentence. And if they got better, it was because of that. But really it's because most people just get better.
They had control groups in those ivermectin studies.
I know, but it's never, we're going to talk about that. None of this means anything.
Okay.
All this like Tamiflu is the same thing when you had the flu before COVID cured the flu.
Yep.
Tamiflu does nothing. It's been repeatedly shown to do nothing. Except in a few of the tests that were performed by Tamiflu, the company that makes Tamiflu. And they were like, it's great.
I thought the flu went away because we were at a grand solar minimum.
Well, maybe, but that and also COVID.
Okay.
Right? So these sort of games you play were like it cured 70% of people, but then if you just didn't do anything, they also were cured.
Right. That
is like so much of what we hear and read. It's all of the same problem. It's all the same problem. Like, and this, so because the language of statistics is so appealing to a fact-based culture, like facts, even though we don't have any facts at all.
Right.
It's to put like a number on something, people just salivate. They're like, 36.3. 90% effective. They just love that. And they just love pouring over vaccine statistics is like porn for these people. They just look at it and they're like, oh, look, it's not even in this age group and that demographic, it's 40% effective, and then over there, and then I gotta get. Then it's just they get lost in that, right?
It is sort of like they wrote a version of 50 Shades of Grey for people that are obsessed with being afraid.
Yes, and it all is sexual. I mean the mask stuff. I mean, I don't. This is where I get a little Freudian. I know I just ragged on Freud, but the whole like I don't know. There's something a little sexual about the whole like forced penetration thing.
Yeah,
I detect that in people. It's a bit weird. That's why they get so excited about it. Like,
well, yeah, it's like I'm gonna put my hand over your mouth and then put my hand over your mouth and then inject you with it. It's weird. Yeah, the whole mask and vaccine is symbolically messed up. Just leave it there.
and especially when you get it like, because during like last year and now, like in the height of the panics, they were like, now here's how you safely go to glory holes.
Right.
Remember they really wrote those?
Oh yeah. They're still writing stuff like that.
It's
like here's how to.
It's like strange.
Be a complete deviant without catching an imaginary virus. I mean, it's wild what they're putting out there.
Like you guys are the super spreaders, by definition. But anyway, so you've got that problem. You got the problem that it's like a statistics becomes another fetish item, but then you've also got the fact that statistics is actually sort of hard to do. Like if you've ever taken statistics, it can be a difficult subject, and most people just don't know what they're talking about, and they cite like average, you know, and then but they don't know what they're doing, and so people that write statistics either honestly they don't know what they're doing either, and they misrepresent the data, or very, very dishonestly knowing what they're doing, misrepresent the data, and most people don't. See, this is the thing. Stats is a great way to technically tell the truth.
Yeah.
While actually lying.
Yep.
Like my dad used to say, you could use statistics to prove the safest place to be in a lightning storm is hanging onto a metal flagpole. Because no one would ever be dumb enough to do that, and so the percentage of people that die doing that is 0 in a lightning storm.
Yep.
And therefore, it's the safest place. Because look, statistically, 0% of people die hanging on to the light pole in a lightning storm, the flagpole in a lightning storm, right? And pharma companies use this to lie about stats with their drugs. Governments use stats to lie about everything. Banks do it with money. Schools do it with how well kids are doing. It'd be better off, actually, if we just banned the use of percentage from public discourse. Like, no one can talk about percentages ever.
Well,
we'd probably be in a healthier place.
There's a great example of the sort of absence of data phenomenon in the vaccine debate, because early on when all these women were reporting, you know, irregular periods and menopausal women having periods, and the health officials came out and said, now there is no data to suggest that the vaccines have any effect on the female reproductive cycle or systems. And it turns out they didn't study it. Like they didn't measure, or it was not part of the questionnaire for the study group. Anything about menstrual cycle, anything about any of that. They didn't record data on that. And then they said there isn't any.
Right, which is true, technically.
Yeah.
But it implies that you studied it. Like when you say there's no data to support that.
Right.
That implies that you studied it and didn't find anything, not that you just didn't look.
Right. All they have to do is just not look for it, and then they can say it's not there. And,
yeah,
and people also read the story. When somebody reads a story that says there is no data to imply, they think that means it doesn't happen. And that's like the most common lie that they've been telling is there's no data to imply ...
There's no data to imply that. Yeah, that exactly. Which the people take to mean the opposite, which is that there is data to imply that it doesn't.
Right.
When you say there's no data to imply X, people hear that as there is data to imply not X.
Here's a useful little thing to keep in your mind, is that absence of evidence does not imply evidence of absence.
Mm-hmm. And also that hysterical women must be believed when they talk about vague inui symptoms of long COVID.
Right.
But cannot be believed when they talk about their irregular menstrual cycles.
Right. Even though one of them has a physical,
right. But if they just say I have brain fog.
Yeah, brain fog.
Which just means I'm sad at work.
Right.
That is long COVID. You see.
Oh no, I got brain fog.
But if your period is 7 times more heavy than usual, and lasts 3 times as long, that's just shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Shut up, stupid woman. Talk about your the fact that you don't think you can smell as good still 7 months later.
Yeah.
Which is never true. That's all in their heads. Mm-hmm. Because if you put something stinky around them, they all complain. You can test.
Plus,
here's what you do. Here's what you should do. To just call these people that have long COVID out.
Mm-hmm.
is just like take something rotten and put it in their desk.
Yeah.
Like putrid. And then if they complain, go, oh, I thought you couldn't smell anything, so you wouldn't mind. And I've done this, and it always works, and they get mad at you. Mostly for, not really for covering the inside of their desk with like 7-month-old yogurt. Mm-hmm. They're not really that mad at that.
Yeah.
What they're actually mad at is that you don't believe their fake disease.
Yep.
Which is that's been not believing their fake disease has been my primary fight with the female sex my whole life. Mm-hmm. When they were like, I have fibromyalgia. This started when I was like 16, and I had a teacher in high school that claimed to have fibromyalgia, and she was one of the early adopters.
Yeah,
and I said she told us that in class, and she was like very upset about it, and everyone, and I said, no, you don't. Like I said that's not real. And it was very tense, and I got a bad grade.
I bet you did.
That year.
Yeah.
Even though my work was fine, just from that one day, because she was like, and I said, I don't remember my exact phrasing, but she was listing all her symptoms. And I said, I said, that just sounds, I think I may have said, that just sounds like you're lazy. Which... Because she was like, I'm tired all the time. I don't like doing it. Which is not a sensitive thing to say.
Right.
Right. And I have since learned and grown that I don't always need to directly attack people being silly. But back then, it was a different story.
Right.
Fibromyalgia, that other one they have, chronic fatigue syndrome, which is just like, oh, I'm tired.
Yeah.
But they're never tired when there's something they want to do.
No, they perk right up.
It's like, hey, you want to go on a fun thing? Oh, I'm having a good day today.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same thing forever with that. And now they have a government mandated excuse for their fake stuff, which is long COVID, which they can pretend to have forever.
Now they can have, be... It's like I can have job and not get paid. I mean, I can not work and get paid.
It's tempting to just claim that I have long COVID, honestly.
Yeah.
It's like, look, I can't do anything. I've got long COVID.
I'm crippled by brain fog.
Oh, dear. But, anywho, so we're going to go through all the statistical, well, not all of them. There's many. But some of the major statistical tricks people use, either purposefully or just because they don't know what they're doing. And some people might say, but like, he talks about in this book, people have accused me of teaching people how to lie with science. Mm-hmm. And he said, I guess so, but I consider this a self-defense manual. The self-defense manual. So you can spot the tricks and not be fooled. You could also take the low road and use the tricks, but don't do that. Right?
Right.
So trick 1 is the sample with built-in bias. Okay. So this was written in 1959. So you have to keep in mind that the dollar values are 1959 dollar values. He says, quote, the average Yale man, class of 24, Time magazine noted, commenting on something in the New York Sun, makes $25,111 a year. So, and everyone's like, oh, good, that was an impressive amount of money at the time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Everyone's like, well, good, great. That means if I send my kid to Yale, he will be quite rich and I won't have to work in my old age. And neither will he. It's a great advertisement for you. If you go to Yale, you'll make a huge sum of money. And the author says 2 things about this figure stand out immediately to me as someone that spots this stuff. 1 is it's surprisingly precise. And 2, it is quite improbably high. So there's small likelihood, right, that the average income of any far-flung group is going to be known to the dollar. Mm-hmm. That's one thing you have to look for when they have overly precise statistics. Like most people don't even know their own income that precisely.
Right.
Unless all 100% of their income was from salary. Then you have a paper trail of it. But like if you sold something at a yard sale, if if you did a little work on the side somewhere and someone paid you in cash, you probably don't know your own income to $1, right? So the idea that you can give to $1 for a group of people is sort of insane, right? However, the other thing is that it's calculated. This average is calculated from the almost assuredly, because you have to think like, how would they acquire this data? The surveyors acquire the data by simply asking people from Yale how much they earned. Now, really what you have is an average of how much people said they earned.
Are you implying that Ivy League people might, in vanity, exaggerate their income?
Yes, but I'm also implying that people in vanity exaggerate everything. For instance, you heard for years how obese the southern United States is compared to the rest of the country. No?
Mm-hmm.
Turns out, all of that data is just from phone surveys.
Mm-hmm.
They would call people on the phone. So one, you have a sample bias there. This is the well-chosen sample problem of you're getting people that still answer the telephone.
Yep.
When a random number comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one kind of person already. Right? Two, you're then relying on people's self-report of their own height and weight.
Right.
Which most people, to be honest, most people don't even know their height. People be like, I'm 5'8", and you measure them, it's like, oh, you're really closer to 5'9", or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't weigh themselves regularly and are just guessing.
Yep.
Right? Especially if someone is nervous about their weight. They may report the last time they weighed, which was 3 years ago.
Yep.
They haven't wanted to step on a scale since. And then also people that are in places that are more concerned about weight may have a tendency to underreport.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like if you call a random woman on the phone and say, how much do you weigh? How many of those women do you think are going to tell you the exact truth? They don't even tell the truth on their driver's licenses. You know what I mean? Like it's like asking a guy in the gym how much he bench presses. It's going to be not true.
Right.
Most this is why the gym is one of the greatest places to learn about human nature, because, well, for many reasons. But one of them being that people just lie.
Yeah.
Like if you ask any random guy in a gym, hey, how much do you bench press? He's going to tell you 25% more than is true.
Okay.
Sometimes. Because he knows you're not going to sit there and ask him to do his max. And if you say, oh, let me see, he say, I just did arms the other day. I got to rest a few before I do my max.
Right.
There's always an excuse for why you don't, and you're not, no one's going to, first of all, no one really asks women how much they weigh in public. And if they did, the lady is just not going to step on a scale to prove it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So all this, it might be true that people in the southern United States are heavier.
Yeah.
I think it probably is true.
I agree.
But we don't have any actual, that data about it is curious. We don't know how much.
Right.
Right? And so you have to be careful of these sorts of things because people like to believe data that confirms their biases. And so you say, people in the South are stupid and fat. Look at this data. Yeah, stupid.
Well, in fact, that conclusion isn't supported by the data at all. That people in the South are stupid and fat. I saw somebody make the case recently that the closer you are to the bottom of the watershed of your whatever your geographical watershed is more likely to be obese. And
that's true.
Yeah, and then if you're closer to the edges of your watershed, you're more likely to be lean.
Well, people plump up as they get toward the ocean.
Yeah.
Because they have to float.
Because they have to float.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for my new excuse.
So already, and so if you imagine this survey of these people in 1959, if you're asking people who went to Yale, hey, how much do you make? Well, and then they're like, oh, I went to Yale, I should probably be making more than I am, right? Or you just, when you're asking people, the people that aren't making very much just don't respond, right? So you're already cutting out because they don't want to talk about how they're not doing well. So they just don't answer the survey. Others, perhaps, will minimize how much they earn, fearing maybe the income tax man being overly interested in them.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Or fearing how much their neighbors may be jealous of how much they earned. Like, oh, maybe if I say it on this survey, I know it's supposed to be anonymous, but maybe somehow it'll get out and they'll see that I make like 7 times more than them and they'll be jealous. I'll just downplay it a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really the numbers are skewed all over the map, and you have this sample which isn't worth anything. It's a sample with built-in bias. And here's the secret of statistics, is that all statistical models and rules, like all the math behind it, only works with random samples.
Mm-hmm.
And random samples in the wild are almost impossible to acquire, especially amongst people. It's very, very difficult to get a random sample. Like, so, okay. So one thing, like this is like we talk about self-report, psychiatric drugs are really bad about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it works with all drugs. Is they work on how the efficacy of the drug they tell you is just based on self-report.
Yeah.
That's all it is. So a lot of they're like, okay, Mr. Jones, time for your checkup. Hey, we want to see if this drug has helped your depression, right? Come on down to the office. We'll do a checkup. Then you get to the office and in the study, and they hand you some coffee and a donut. And like 5 minutes after you eat the coffee and the donut, they walk in and say, "How you feeling?" You say, "Oh, I feel okay right now."
Yeah, yeah.
Is
I'm
your irritability
on
down?
sugar and
Yeah.
caffeine,
I'm not
baby.
sure Great. Our medicine's working, and they really do that.
Yeah.
Like they will bring the people in. What they'll do, a pharmaceutical company will do, is they'll have you do your initial study of your depression in a very clinical environment.
Mm-hmm.
With like fluorescent lighting, and they know this. They do it on purpose, right? And then this the whole scene. You say I have depression, and whatever, and the whole scene is sort of a downer.
Yeah.
When you get there, and so and they talk to you like really dreary, and then when they go for your checkup to see how well your medicine's working, you will go to a bright office building. It's technically a doctor's office, but it's not like a hospital, right?
It's like a spa.
They'll have a lot of plants around it. There'll be coffee. The receptionist will be very pretty. There will be donuts and snacks. And then they'll say, "Now how are you feeling?" And you'll say, "Well, I feel, I rate your depression." And it's like, "Oh, I rate it, surprise, surprise, it is not as bad today." And they say, "Oh, look how well our drug works."
Yeah.
And if you think they don't do that, you're naive. They 100% do that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
They do it with even weight loss drugs. People weigh less in the morning.
Yeah.
So they will have people come down on the first thing in the morning, and we'll weigh you. But they'll do the other one, like how much you weighed the first time, like in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's enough to give them like 5 pounds difference. And they can say, "Oh yeah, see, it helped." It has a certain percentage chance of you reducing so many pounds per month, right?
Yep.
Right. We found that our patients lost 5 pounds every month, and they did it 1 month. And they stayed the same, but people fluctuate 3, 4, 5 pounds over the day, and so they measure one, and that's how so much of these drugs and statistics operate.
Yeah.
Right. And they absolutely do that. I've known pharmaceutical reps that take doctors out to strip clubs.
Oh yeah, that's how you sell. That's how doctors
you sell
are just getting bribed with perks all the time. Yeah, I mean, they go on vacations. Like, you get invited to go to a conference to learn about drugs. That's code for we're going to take you skiing.
We're going to feed you, and also,
really
frankly,
nice
we're going to give you a wad of cash under the table.
Yeah,
while we're out skiing at the strip club.
Yep.
So, and this is the sample for statistics to work. The sample has to be good, right? Like if you have a barrel of beans, say, and some are red beans and some are white, and you want to know how many or what percentage is each, there's only one way to do that, and that's to count every single bean. But that takes a long time. This is why we have statistics, because counting all the beans, counting all the people, like if you want to know how many black people are in accounting firms, and you want to know the percentage of diversity in accounting, the only real way to get the accurate number would be to count every accountant and log their race.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very difficult to do, right? If not bordering on impossible to figure out how exactly where all the accountants are in America and what their race is. So what you do is you do sampling, and then you try to make statistical models about it to come up with the answers. But imagine, so you have this barrel of red and white beans, and so one thing you might do is you might reach in and get a handful of the beans and say, well, in this handful, there's 70% are white and 30% are red.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, well, that's the whole barrel, right? But if the person pouring in the beans, if they poured in all the white beans first and then they poured all the red beans in, you're going to get a bite because there'll be way more white beans toward the bottom. Right? So the statistics only works and is valid if the sample is randomly chosen and representative of the population. Right? And there's really very difficult to know if that's true. In fact, in like population studies, it's almost impossible, right? And if you did that and you took out the beans and you said they're 70% white, 30% red, without knowing anything else, there's nothing to recommend that number. It's really nothing more than a guess, but it has a very sort of convincing degree of precision.
Right.
Right. And it's like, oh, it's 70%. We measured it. But what did you actually? The 70% of the ones you pulled out in your hand were white, but that's all that actually means. You see, and people think, oh, I measured that, and then it's in the this. Once you see all this, you begin to see through like medical stuff and banking stuff and it's all nonsense.
Well, imagine also if when you pull the beans out of your hand, the person who pulled the beans out looks at the group of beans and says, oh, well, that one doesn't really count as a gray bean. That's gray, kind of. That's not white.
Right. Yeah.
This bean is lumpy. We're not going to count that one. And they can manipulate the data set further after the population is chosen. In fact, just about every study, if you actually go through and read them, they will talk about, well, we eliminated 27 of the study participants after the fact, because we found out A, B, and C, and D. And sometimes the reasoning is good, and sometimes the reasoning is terrible for the reason that they pulled them out of the sample.
Yeah, and a lot of times the reasoning and the reasoning suspiciously coincides with not getting the answer they wanted.
Right. It's like all these deaths from this drug didn't count because, reasons.
Right. Right. And so you've got several this is on the topic of built-in bias. Like, one is the idea that people answer surveys honestly is a huge assumption, especially on anything that might be embarrassing, like people's weight, how much they bench press, or what they read, for example. Like he's talking about in his own time, people did market research on what people were reading to try and figure out what they needed to publish, right?
Yep.
And so they did a house-to-house survey. Like the guys went around, they sampled people in the city, and they went house to house, and they said, they had a questionnaire, what magazines does your household read? And when they analyzed the results, people loved the very highbrow, expensive, high sophisticated Harper's magazine, and almost no one read the lowbrow, basically 1950s version of True Crime magazine called True Story.
Right.
Now, even though true story sold 50 million more copies every month than Harper's. Almost no one read it.
Weird.
Almost no one read it. And so the people, even though this was an anonymous, this was like people were like, we're never going to publish this, who you are. This is all going to be anonymously chosen. People were still just answering the guy at the door or the man on the phone and saying, yeah, I read romance novels.
Right.
That's what I read. People say, no, I read War and Peace. That's my favorite book. You ask people what their favorite book... Think about that. I mean, you ask people what their favorite book is. How often do you get something that's not like a highbrow book?
Yeah.
Very rarely, even though those people never read that thing they said. Oh, yeah. Moby Dick. And not The Bull Rider's Christmas Baby. Which is a real book that sells quite a lot.
Really?
The Bull Rider's Christmas Baby.
Sounds ridiculous.
All romance novel. The romance novel genre is fascinating because it's like women spiraling into further and further ridiculous fantasies. Like there'll be like a Viking, but he also has a spaceship. And he's ripped and somehow they have the technology to be forever young. And so the story is about how he continues to love her even though he is in a pristine, like, supremely muscular 20-year-old body, and she's now approaching 60. And they travel the solar system together and go on Viking raids. It is that ridiculous. Like these romance novels get crazy.
And this funny, like men would be embarrassed to have that fantasy.
Well, women are embarrassed to have that fantasy too. That's why they only buy the books and never tell anyone they bought the books.
Okay.
They say Moby Dick when they're asked. Yeah. And not, or, War and Peace and not The Bull Rider's Christmas Baby.
Right.
Right. Which is a fantasy of like having a cowboy who and a baby at Christmas. I don't know.
Wow.
Just watch the Hallmark Channel. Okay. Everything is like fantasy European country. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, the Prince of Gorgolba fell in love with me.
Yep.
Anyway, so people will always, so that's built-in bias right there, right? Like, all you really have is a sample of people's snobbery, not of what people actually read. And so when you do the same thing of like, racism's going up in the country, all you did was ask people if they thought racism was going up in the country.
Yeah.
And if people thought that other people were being more racist, then they say yes. Right? But that's all you have a survey of is people's perception of what they think other people are thinking, not what's actually happening.
The poverty right. Surveys are perfect in this example, because what they'll do with a lot of these is they'll ask a bunch of children, were you hungry this year? Did you go hungry?
Yes.
And the kids are like, yeah, I'm hungry all the time, because kids are hungry all the time. But if you ask them that and then say like 70% of children living in the inner city struggled with hunger, that
exactly.
It makes no, like, you're asking kids if they were hungry. I mean, what kind of answer do you think you're going to get? But that's really how they do.
That's really surveys, how they do
and then
stuff.
They're like, we need to give more government money to food programs or whatever stupid thing they're lobbying for. And it's just a bold-faced lie, and people believe it.
Yeah, I mean, there are kids in America whose parents don't or can't take care of them, and they have problems, right?
True.
But
yes,
but the statistics behind it is almost always nonsense.
Yeah,
because it's just self-report. Because how are you always have to ask, there are two questions to always ask yourself to cut through all the BS. One is, how could they possibly know that? And if you can't come up with a reasonable answer, you should really be skeptical of it. And two is, who's taking the picture?
Right.
Like when you see Neil Armstrong come off the lunar, like who's doing the picture there? Obviously, even if it was 100% true, it was a staged photo. Like they got out, set up the camera, then got back on and came down. So it wasn't the first time they're getting out. Mm-hmm. It's the second time.
Yeah.
Or maybe the first, you know what I mean? It's a staged photo. So, yeah. So like they're just like, hey, how could you possibly know with any accuracy how many children didn't have an adequate breakfast. How could you possibly even know what children are eating at home or on the way to, like, there's no way to know that. But they report it with like high accuracy. Like, oh, it's 73.2%. And that, the high accuracy gives people the illusion of science, when really it's just, this is how many people answered our survey. And that's all that has ever been. This is why Afghanistan failed so hard. The U.S. military goes around with guns surveying people. Hey, are you going to fight for this government we installed? Sure.
Absolutely.
Totally, man. Well, yeah. And so they say, look, we're surveyed the people. And they said like 90% said they're going to really defend it. Like, oh, great, let's go home. And then it's like, whew. Like, you can't, like, on some things, surveys are valid, you know, like maybe on Family Feud and other such things, limited capacity. But in a lot of cases, there's so many problems with the survey that it doesn't mean anything. So the next time you're reading that your average American, right, brushes his teeth 1.02 times a day or whatever, you ask yourself, how could they possibly know that? How can you possibly know how many times people are actually brushing their teeth? You don't. And if you're asking people, do you brush your teeth every day or twice a day? How many people that don't brush their teeth every day are going to say, actually, I don't brush my teeth that much? Not a lot of people are going to answer that question, right?
And the person you're asking the question, even if they're generally an honest person, you're still likely to get what they aspire to as your first answer rather than what's true. I mean, and they may, because our ideas of ourselves are always biased toward what we aspire to be or what we've been told all our life, or depending on, you know, all your self-image and all the psychology stuff. If you ask someone something about themselves, that especially if it's linked to their character in some way, the answer is never going to be accurate. Like, we can't even help it as human beings.
Yeah. Like, people will just, and it's not even, like you say, it's not even that they're trying to lie. They're just, they're saying what they want to do,
right? More
often than not. Like, do you eat vegetables? How many servings of vegetables do you eat? And people will give you an ask. It's like the bottom drawers of a refrigerator for most people are aspirational, where they put like fruits and veggies that they think they will eat and then don't.
Really, you know? one way to get the truth on a question like this is the first question needs to be, how many times a week do you aspire to exercise? And then they'll say, I aspire to exercise twice a week. And then you say, how often do you actually exercise? And then then because you force them to compare the aspiration to the actuality.
Yeah, and even then people will lie.
Yeah.
But you're getting better, right?
Right.
So, and then like, and here's another one. This has been a problem. Everything's always the same. Nothing ever changes. It's the same script forever. There's nothing new under the sun. He talks about this same problem which you have in our days, and I worked on this problem. Like, does the early discovery of cancer save lives? Probably. That's what his answer is in this book. That's what my answer is now.
Yeah.
But of most of the data used to prove this, the best that can be said of it is that it doesn't prove it.
Oh, wow. It implies but isn't statistically relevant?
Well, like, take mammograms, for instance. This has been a huge kerfuffle because the breast cancer industry is a powerful behemoth.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Susan B. Komen or whatever, and the pink ribbon. But in places where it is not as big a behemoth, strangely, when you do the same, the data that mammograms save lives is not nearly as strong.
Right.
In places where you have a very large media presence about how important it is, and like whole foundations about it, like the United States, it turns out that when you ask the data, it's extremely strong. But if you go to certain Eastern European countries and you compare women that have regular mammograms to those that don't, the data sort of goes away, strangely.
Yep.
It's a bit it's a bit weird how that can happen, but it does happen. And then, honestly, for some, it may actually cause harm.
Yeah,
it's unclear because you have you're doing a thing of dubious worth, and then it causes a lot of women to have anxiety, especially if they get a call back like we didn't know, we thought we see something but we didn't. Then they spend 2 weeks worrying about they have breast cancer. They fall into bad behavioral patterns like drinking and like laying in bed all day worrying and being depressed.
Yep.
Only to find out that it was nothing.
Yep.
And you do this times 1,000,000 every year.
Yep.
Over and over again.
And the callback, I mean, I'm just going to say this without any evidence except for human nature, but the rate at which they call people back is going to be the rate at which they can take callback appointments and keep the clinic full.
Yes. It's all dependent on like their staffing ability and all. Like if you increase staff, you increase callbacks. That's
right.
It's just what it is. And that's just because people have a limited amount of time they can devote mind power to things. And so after a while, it's just like, well, I don't know, they're probably okay.
But the whole mammogram thing in this country has sort of become a weird modern religious ritual where women have to go every year and do penance so that they can be protected from the evil cancer. And
right, or men in prostate exams is the same thing, which, again, very dubious.
Right.
And what they do is they always find someone that didn't go get a mammogram and they gets a breast cancer, or that didn't go get a prostate exam and then gets prostate cancer, and they say, "I see, it would have been if you had done it."
Right.
But you never sample all the people that didn't do either and didn't get either.
Yeah.
Right. So it's but so he's talking about that in this book. He says in his time, this is in the 50s. This is the data they were using to prove that early discovery of cancer saves lives. Right? They were using the Connecticut Tumor Registry. That was the first one that was like going back to 1935.
Okay.
And this was the first data that was like, look, if we find it earlier, we're going to get it. We're going to have a better chance. So they used data from 1935 and appear to show a substantial increase in the 5-year survival rate from that year till 1941. But when you dig into the data, actually those records began in 1941, and everything earlier was obtained by tracing back. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like many patients had since left Connecticut, whether they lived or died could not be learned. And according to medical reporter Leonard Engel, the built-in bias thus created is enough to account for nearly the whole of the claimed improvement in survival rate.
Wow.
And that's been true of a lot of stuff. Like, did you know right now, the COVID stuff, and they talk about most of the people that die are unvaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
That's true statistically. It's also true that number comes from counting everyone over the year that has supposedly died of COVID over the entire year.
Most of whom were unvaccinated because the vaccine didn't exist.
Because where the vaccine didn't exist.
Oh, man. What?
And if you don't believe me, look it up. That's how they get that number.
I shouldn't be surprised by that, but I am. But I shouldn't be. Because of course they would do it that way, because it makes the vaccine look more effective.
Because the people doing that made the vaccine. And the NIH in the UK owns part of the Moderna vaccine patent.
Yep.
They get it's conflict of interest up and down.
Yep.
Right. And as time goes on, and more people have been vaccinated, more people die, and the numbers start to even out. We're entering the part of the year where we've had more time in the year that there's been vaccinated than not.
Right.
The numbers are starting to balance out. Because it's not true. But see, even that perception makes people think in their local clinics, like, oh, yeah, this is... But, again, all the doctors used to think that the antihistamines cured your cold, and it did not. It did nothing.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about other things of that went on in this time. So, and it's like a psychiatrist who reports that he's like, almost everyone's neurotic.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, your sample is that you have crazy people come to you all day. That's why you think that.
Yeah.
That's why you think almost everyone's neurotic. Like, people will say that. Like, Freud was like, everyone wants to, like, have sex with their mom.
All right.
Like, well, he probably did think that because, like, but you have crazy sexual deviants coming to you every day.
Right.
And that's your and then you say, that's your sample. And you're like, that's the world. Right. You see people make the same claims online when they're like, well, everyone watches porn 20 times a day. And it's just like that. No, that's just you and your crew.
Yeah.
That's just what and they just assume.
They did the poll on Reddit. So
yeah, they did the poll on Reddit. Right. And so these are all examples of, a sample with built-in bias. And so you should give that second look to sort of anything that you read, and and any statistic you hear, it's like, how would they possibly know that? And like, does this have bias? And because you can't, like, especially when they do things by demographic, they said this, like, so many blacks think this, and so many Latinos think this, and so many. One thing you have to say, like, well, how would you get this sample? Like, you want a random sample of Americans, right? What they do is they try to get what they call a stratified sample, because a random sample is next to impossible, because you just can't at random pull the exact number of black people, and it just doesn't work. So what they do is they say, well, there's 12% of black people in the country. Let's make sure our sample has 12% black people in it.
Yep.
And let's make sure we have 30% Latinos or whatever, and 12% Pacific Islanders and whatever. And well, that'll be the sample. And then you say, okay, but then you have to say, okay, but what about socioeconomic status? Well, let's make sure that all of them are from, and then age group, and then gender. And then when you add all these factors in and you're trying to like apply them correctly to each group, it just becomes a nightmare. And you never get away from the bias. Like,
and how do you figure out which of those variables is going to affect the outcome or not? Because you could apply infinite number of those variables to modify your sample population. And so who makes that decision, and what are their assumptions?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, so let's say you want to do this sort of thing, and you instruct your pollsters that they should talk to so many percentage Asian, so many percentage white people, so many people in this income bracket, so many people that are farmers, so many people that are white collar jobs, whatever. And all the while, also, the group has to be divided equally between the young and the old. So we'll say 40, people under 40, over 40, right?
Right.
Sounds all fine. But what actually happens? Like, on the question of black and white, right? Like, or the race, the interviewer will probably judge, okay, so this is a black person. But even then, you run into problems of like people that are mixed. Where do they put them? Like what group is a person that's 3/4 white fall into? Where is he put in the poll? Right, that's already a problem.
Right.
On income, you'll make more mistakes because you're relying on self-report and also like people's assumptions on where people are. As to like when you get into like other things like people that are farmers or whatever, how do you classify a man that farms part-time and lives in the city too? Or a guy that is an accountant, but he's a stay-at-home dad and he only does accounting like 2 days a week.
Yep.
Right. Even the question of age can pose some problems because if you have these people responding, right, and then people are doing it because a lot of this stuff is just done by the interviewer's interpretation, right? Yep. And so what you end up doing is like you say under 40, over 40 was like, but what about the people that are near and you don't really know, like early 40s, late 30s? A lot of them will just get left out of the data because the interviewer wasn't able to assign a specific age group for them. It's like, well, I'm not sure what he's in. Let's just drop that one. And this sort of little stuff happens all throughout the thing. And it explains why so much is fake. Because, like I said, statistical theory is based on random sample. And random sample is all but impossible to attain in actuality of a population of people. It's extremely difficult and extremely expensive to even approach.
Do you remember when you were a kid and your mom would take you to the mall during the day and there'd be the guy with the clipboard taking surveys and asking people questions? I look back on that, I think he's only surveying upper middle class women who make enough money to go shopping at the mall and don't have a day job.
In the middle, exactly.
In the middle of the day.
This is what but see, they choose somewhere like the mall because the mall is a common meeting place. And they say, well, did people from all walks of life come to the mall?
Right.
Which is true in a sense. Like people go to the mall and Mexicans go to the but like you said, it's only the people that are in the middle of the day can afford to go to the mall, go to the mall.
Yep.
Right? Just like he gives the example in this book of they used to, in England, do a lot of polling at train stations because they figured everyone takes the train, right? And then, but people would point out, well, you don't get at the train is elderly people that don't travel and like women with small children who are not moving with and like your very location is dropping out lots of people. Just like if you phone survey, who are you voting for, and you call people in the middle of the day, you mostly just get old people that are at home. And still answer the phone. Like, how many of our listeners have ever been surveyed by a pollster about who they're going to vote for?
I never get surveyed for any of that stuff.
Me either. I mean, once or twice, maybe. But, so that's how all of these things are sort of just this problem of built-in bias, right? Is a big issue. That's why the vaccine is proving to not work, because they're like, it's 99% effective 4 months ago. And then they were like, it's 47. And now it's down to like 32 or something. And all that is because they were counting the number of people that died all the way back to January and saying, look, most of them are unvaccinated.
Yep.
That's all that was. It was just lying. Now that's true. What they were doing is technically a truth.
Yeah.
The way they calculated it. And if you looked into the data, you would see that. But the way they report it, you say, oh, look, if I get it, I'm 99% better or whatever. When none of that was ever real.
It really can't be overstated how much of the COVID quote unquote science was done along these deceptive lines.
Oh yeah. And doctors are not very smart.
No, they just believe whatever
I love you, Doc,
sales reps
you guys
tell them.
Really gotta.
Yeah. Well, they're so overworked. They don't have time to do any research. Doctors never do research.
No.
They just don't. They just see patients all day. And when they're not seeing patients, they're talking to the rep that came to see them. And then when they're not working, they're on vacation courtesy of some pharma company. I mean, that's at a quote unquote conference where you can bring your family. That's it. That's all they do.
Yeah, and also you have to like just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you know anything about vaccines.
Yeah,
exactly.
Totally.
Like you see these pediatricians on the internet being like, kids should wear masks. It's like you ask yourself like, how you don't know anything more about the efficacy of viral transmission of masks than I do. It's not something you studied. COVID is brand new, allegedly. How do you know its efficacy? You don't know with school children at school. You've never. How could you possibly even know?
I was at a doctor's office and I told the doctor who was trying to push a vaccine. I said, there is aborted fetal tissue in this vaccine. He said, no, there's not. That's ridiculous. No, there's not. And so I had him pull out the prescribing information that comes in the box with the vial, and I showed him in it. It said may contain human diploid lung fibroblasts. And, I looked it up and I showed him. This guy had never read the prescribing information for the stuff he was injecting into people. And he was so ignorant that he was flummoxed when I showed him this. And it's like, it's right there. It's on the product documentation, moron. And they still don't. And a lot of people still don't believe it. You can show it to them. They don't believe it.
I mean, it's not even that they're morons. It's just that it's so much stuff going on. And people assume, sometimes I code computers. And I'm sure you could write several novel-length books of interesting things about the code that I never have known.
Yeah.
Right? All these details that could go on forever and ever and ever. And all these, that this piece of code does this in the registry. It's like, well, that's impossible. It's like, oh, wow. I bet that happens all the time. I bet people that really, have really dug into it. But I don't need that level of knowledge for what I'm doing.
Right.
Right? So I don't have it. And he doesn't need to be a vaccine expert to be like, here, take the flu vaccine.
Yeah, because that's his job, is just to put it into people.
Right. He needs to know about, I don't know, diagnosing hand, foot, and mouth.
Right.
And so that's what he does. But people assume I'm a doctor, I know everything about medicine, which is crazy because medicine is extremely complicated.
Right. There is a cult. There's a cult around the doctor. And the doctor, can't even admit that he doesn't know everything about medicine because that breaks up the value of the white jacket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the second big problem, the second big way to lie is the well-chosen average. Okay, so imagine that you are you're a snobby person, and you want to live in a snobby area, and I'm a real estate agent, and I say I'm showing you around the house, and I say, this neighborhood income here, $500,000 a year. That's the average income. Mm-hmm. I like this place. I want to be with the rich people. And so you take out a loan bigger than you can really afford.
Yep.
And you buy the house, right? But then a year later, you go to a taxpayers committee because they're circulating a petition to keep the tax rate down and to make sure their housing assessments are not very high, right? And you get there and the guy goes, look, we can't afford an increase in taxes or having the price of our homes being assessed higher. I mean, after all, the average income of the neighborhood is only $120,000.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, yeah, we can't do that because you don't want to pay taxes. But then later you go home and you say, was that realtor lying to me? He said it was $500,000, $120,000. And the thing is, you can't pin it on a lie in either case because both are probably telling the truth. Dun dun dun, and that's true. So? This is a big problem. A lot of people don't know this, but the word average, from a legal perspective, a statistical perspective, a scientific perspective, can have three different meanings.
Mm.
Average can mean median, mean, or mode.
Yep.
And the reason it can do this is because in bell curves, what they call Gaussian curves, which applies to a lot of organic life, like if you take the heights of people in the world, they will form a bell curve. Some are very, very short, some are very, very tall. Most people group around the middle and you have a bell curve-like shaped graph. And in bell curves, median, mean, and mode are the same. They're right the center. But if you have a skewed data set, they are no longer the same. So just for clarification, mean is what most people think of when they. Well, I don't even know if that's true. This is what I think of when I think of the word average. I think a lot of people think of median, but I'm not sure about that. But mean is you take, let's say you have three numbers. I don't know, 10, 20, and 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you say you add them all together. 10 plus 20 plus 10, and you get 40, and then you divide by the number of data points, 3. Right? So you'd have, I don't know what 40 divided by 3 is, but that would be your average, right? That would be your mean.
Right.
The median would be the number at which, I really need 4 data points to make this better. Okay, the median, let's say we've got 10, 10, 20, and 20. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the median would then be the point at which half of the data points fall below it and half fall above it. So if I have 10, 10, 20, and 20, my median would be 15.
Right.
Because 2 of them fall on one side and 2 of them fall on the other.
Okay.
My mode, and I need to add another, I didn't choose a very good sample for an explanation here. But so let's say we have 10, 10, 10, 20, 20. Okay, my mode would be the most occurring number in the data set, which would be 10. It occurs 3 times, right? And in a Gaussian sample, in a bell curve, those are all the same. In a skewed curve, they are not the same. They can be wildly different. For instance, in my example, the 500,000 was the mean, which means that most people were making considerably less than 120,000, but there were a few guys that were ultra millionaires living there. Like in this county, in this neighborhood, most people are making 100K, but there's a few people down that have a giant mansion on the lake.
Yep.
right? And they are making 10 million, 20 million a year, and that is skewing the average, the mean.
Right. Yep.
The median, if I use the median though, I'm saying that number which half of the people fall below, and then I say that's 120 because half the people make less than that. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And then the mode might be something totally different, right? And so when people say the average, people will use the mean, median, or mode depending on the story they want to tell. If they want to say that their drug or their economic policies working really great, they'll say, well, on average, and they'll use which average gives them the best story. Mm-hmm. If they want to denigrate something, they'll use the average, which makes it the less. And they're both technically telling the truth. But what you think median means, or average means, may be totally different than what they are actually talking about. And this is a big problem. This one comes up all the time. Like when they say, like, this is, on average, 50% of people experienced improvement, right? They may be talking about the mean. They may be talking about the median. They may be talking about the mode. And all of those are completely, you can't legally challenge any of them but it also, unless you qualify, what an unqualified average, like when you say average, means virtually nothing. And you have to keep that in mind. Say on average, unless they go median average, modal average, or mean average, it means almost nothing to you. Because you really can't, because like if it's a skewed data set, everyone may make $10,000 a year, and there's one dude that makes Jeff Bezos may live in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Or have a house there.
Yeah.
Like Jeff Bezos, for tax purposes, bought a house in Kentucky. Right? In like Asheville, Kentucky.
Yeah, he would
and
move
everyone
the stats
around
of
him
the whole state.
Makes $10,000 a year. Yeah. And he is the richest man on earth. And then you say, oh, the average income here is $500 million a year.
Right.
Right? So you really, unless an unqualified average is almost nothing, but people give you unqualified averages all the time in defense of their position. And a lot of them don't even know that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right? They just don't know. This is like statistics is like giving a sword to a toddler. People, it's like they don't know what they're doing and they make all these claims. Yeah. And then they're just causing damage everywhere. This is why teaching people to read was a mistake. And Aristotle was correct. Because people they just go crazy when they, but so anyway, again, if you have that bell-shaped curve, now, then it's all the same. But if you don't, then it can really be, you can really get to a point where, like I said, in Jeff Bezos' case, where he's the one guy that buys a house in Kentucky, you get to a spot where everybody's below average except one guy. You have the definition of average, which is legally fine, technically fine, where 99.99% of people are below average. Mm-hmm. You see how this can be a problem? All right, the third method is the little figures that are not there. So let's talk about toothpaste. He used an example from his time called Doki's toothpaste. Right? And it said, users report 23% fewer cavities with Doki's toothpaste, the big type says. And people are like, well, I could use 23% less cavities. Right? And also, isn't it great? It says on the package, this comes from an independent laboratory, very reassuringly. And more than that, the account it's a certified laboratory.
Ooh, yeah. By
a certified public, like what more do you want? But if you stop and think for a second, you go, wait a minute. Is any one toothpaste really that much different than another? Mm-hmm. But people say, well, they can't get away with telling lies, so it must be true. But they don't have to tell lies, right? There are easier and more effective ways to deceive you, which is statistics. So the principal problem here is that they purposefully used an inadequate sample, statistically inadequate. For Doki's toothpaste, it was the perfect sample, right? You get a test group of like a dozen people. You get a dozen people, and then you run the test, and you make them brush with Doki's toothpaste
3 times a day.
You
probably had them do it 3 times a day.
3 times a day,
or whatever.
No, you just once a day. Normal. You don't have to go that far. Doki's toothpaste, and you say, after 3 months, did these people get cavities less than most people? And they go, no, it's the same. And they go, okay, let's do it again. You do it again with 12 people. And you say, after 3 months, did anyone say, no, they got more cavities? Oh, really? Let's do it again. 3 months go by, you do it with 12 people, and you say, did anyone? Yeah, they got less cavities. Great, publish that one.
Yeah.
And I promise you that is how it works.
Oh yeah.
Because if you take a small enough sample group, random, like so if you toss a coin, let's say I had a quarter and I toss it and I'm gonna do a study. How often does it come up heads if I toss it? And I do it one time and I get heads 7 out of 10 times. And I say science proves that quarters land heads up 70% of the time.
Yeah.
And that would be a scientific quote unquote test. But see, I used a small sample, right? And all I have to do, there's no law saying you have to publish every study you do. There's no law saying you have to publish anything. You can publish only the study you want to publish. And sometimes they will just run, what pharmaceutical companies do is they will run, instead of waiting 3 months every time, right? They'll just run the same, they'll hire 10 different labs. This is the reason there are so many independent quote unquote labs to do studies.
Yep.
Is they will hire 10 different labs to do the study. And then if one of them gives positive results, terrific. Like, we want to prove that our drug works. We want to prove that quarters come up heads over 80% of the time. Well, all you 10 people, you run the thing and you do 10 coin flips or even less, let's say maybe 5. And if you get heads 4 times in a row, which will happen, now if you did then we'll publish that one. Now, if you flipped a coin 10,000 times in a row, you're almost guaranteed to get around 50-50. But when you take a small sample size, the variations in the results can be apparent, and you can pick and choose which ones you want. And so they can say, we did a study, and our toothpaste reduced they'll say, we did a study, and users of Doki's toothpaste experienced a 23% reduction in cavity rates. And that will all be technically true. Mm-hmm. But it means nothing.
Yep.
It means less than nothing.
And
right?
And as an aside here, I wonder, as these pharmaceutical companies are doing these successive tests on all these different drugs, how much more likely are they going to be to call back a lab that gave them the results they wanted versus a lab that gave them results they didn't want?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen this happen in person where people just they just don't publish the study that didn't have the thing they wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you do this enough, you're going to learn which labs are going to give you the results you want.
It was like one scientist told me, he said that he was talking about this problem, and he said, it's strange. He was using an analogy. When I go to court, the legal expert I pay says that the law says the law agrees with me.
Yeah.
And the legal expert the other guy pays says the law agrees with him. And it's funny how when you pay people to come up with an answer, you often get the answer you want.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho, so he gives another example from his time. Again, these tricks have been going on forever. He said something called Dr. Cornish's tooth powder, which is a very 50s sounding product, came onto the market a few years ago with the claim that it had considerable success in the correction of dental cavities. The idea was that the powder contained urea, which a laboratory was supposed to have demonstrated to be valuable for that purpose. Mm-hmm. But when you looked into the data, they'd done it on precisely 6 people. And that's all. And that's all that's required to legally say I did a study, because you did do a study.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing about it that is technically a lie, but that's how easy it is to headline a falsehood with everything in it being certified fact. Like something being a fact and being true are not the same. Because this is something I try to get across to people. Like, well, it's a fact. Like, yeah, maybe. That doesn't mean it means anything.
Right.
You know, they're like, we did a study and users participated. Like, that's a fact. Like, yes, it is. That also is meaningless.
Like, facts have to be interpreted.
Yeah.
And if you correctly interpret them, you may end up at truth. Or if you incorrectly interpret them, you end up somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And this is actually, this idea of like lying by not lying, that's actually how the devil operates too, as an aside. Like he lies, yes, but it's always like a twisted truth, because on one level he sort of can't lie. Like the demons can't lie in a way because they're angels and it's not in their nature to lie, right? However, this very fact makes them the most insidious liars of all, because everything they say is, like these statistics, technically true, but they imply something very false.
Yeah.
The greatest example is the Garden of Eden story. You shall be like God, knowing good from evil. That wasn't a lie. God knew good from evil. If you eat this, you will be like God in that way. Right? But he lets Eve think in her mind, like he says something that's technically true, implying and letting her, like you always do it to yourself. That's the thing. He lets her cook up in her mind, that means I'm going to be like God in this other way. Right? Like, oh, that means I'll be good and happy and powerful, right? But he never says that.
And the other part of his appeal was he didn't say, God didn't say that you shouldn't eat of it. He said, did God say?
Exactly. He doesn't lie. He didn't lie. He asked a question to introduce doubt. And he prompted you to plant the seeds of doubt in your own mind. You see what and so it's, and then he says, she answers, God said, you must not eat because you will die. And he said, you will not certainly die. He puts that, like, he didn't say you will not die. He said, you will not certainly die, which was probably true. A lot of the church fathers thought that if Adam and Eve had just said, oh, sorry, and repented right then, they would have never been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. In fact, that's the majority opinion of the early church fathers. Like, and you wouldn't, like, Satan knew you wouldn't die, like, physically right then. It's like you would not, or like Elijah didn't have to die because he repented of it all completely. And Enoch, right? And so he's like, so Satan's not like, you will die. He's like, you will not certainly die. You see, like he's always technically telling the truth.
Yeah. But
in such a way, this is why it's so insidious. And because the angels on one level can't lie. Like because it's weird. Like they still have their angelic nature, but it's twisted. And so so you always do it to yourself, because you always like, oh yeah, like, oh, that means this. And he never said that. He let you carry that mission on. He just planted a little seed, arguably saying you will not certainly die. It's not 100%. That's arguably the first instance of lying with statistics. If you think about it. So, yeah, back to the thing of that's the small, like they leave out like how big. Now you can do interesting things with small sample sizes if you know the distribution. Like if you know it's a Gaussian curve already ahead of time, then you can do things with small amounts of, because, or if you know if it's a Poisson distribution, you can do things with shockingly small amounts, like I don't know, 10 samples, like 10 data points. But that's because you already know the shape of the curve. Like you do that in radioactivity a lot, because we know that radioactive decay goes by Poisson distribution in some instances. So you can do very quick sample surveys and pretty much know what's going on. But if you don't know the shape of the curve beforehand, any small sample is sort of useless. And so you ask, like, can they get away with flipping a coin 8 times and saying, oh, science says it comes up heads 80% of the time? Absolutely, you can. That's how most drugs get their validation. It's corrupt all the way down.
like from top to bottom. This is why we have such a problem with medicine in this country, because we're using all these drugs and things and trials and treatments that are tweaked to within an inch of their life.
Yep.
By not disinterested parties. And so then when that gets out in the field, it's like, it's not working as we were told. It's like, yeah, I know, but it was never going to. And then the other problem is how much of a sample is enough? Like, that's a tricky one too. Like, it doesn't, sometimes you get a sample that's very large and you're like, oh, that's a big sample. I feel confident about that one. But he, in this book, and remember, he's much closer to this time than we are now, he actually uses the example of the polio vaccine. He said, it appeared to be an impressively large-scale experiment, as medical ones go, because medical experiments are expensive. 450 children were vaccinated against polio, and 680 were left unvaccinated as controls. Shortly thereafter, there was an epidemic in the community. Not one of the vaccinated children contracted a recognizable case of polio. Success. However, neither did any of the controls. So, what the experimenters had overlooked or not understood in setting up their project was the low incidence of paralytic polio. Because again, back then, asymptomatic cases.
Yep.
You have it, but you don't, right? And so, at the usual rate of how many times people contracted polio and had symptoms, a group of that size, you would have only expected maybe 2. So this was doomed from the start to have no meaning as a test. You would have needed something like 25 times that many children. Yeah. Something nearing 25,000 to 30,000 kids to obtain a statistically significant answer. And doing a study of 25,000, like a proper study, is extremely expensive and seldom done. Mm-hmm. What happens is you put it out into the field based on smaller things, and then if it works out, great. If it doesn't, now you have a big enough sample size to say something, and that's why FDA recalls so many drugs sometimes.
Yep. Because
you really can't know, because doing a study on that large. So the efficacy of the polio vaccines, even back then, was recognized to be of dubious nature.
You know, there's a criticism of the vaccines that's valid, saying that they're experimental. But I think one thing you have to realize is that every drug is experimental.
Yeah.
When it comes out.
As one doctor put it, make haste to use the remedy before it's too late. It's like this. We have to do it because some people might die.
Yeah.
You know, that nothing is ever different. It's always the same. This is a quote from him. He says, "The guilt does not always lie with the medical profession alone." This is a direct quote from him in 1959. Think of it, our times, it's the same thing over and over again. He says, "Public pressure and hasty journalism often launch a treatment that is unproved, particularly when the demand is great, panic is high, and the statistical background is hazy." It's been the same forever. It's always the same. He's writing this in 1959. Like, just yesterday, they dropped an article like, oh, yeah, looks like that heart inflammation thing with the vaccine may be more of a problem than we thought.
Right.
But everyone was like, at the time, it's like, we got to get it out. But it's the same. People were doing this in the 50s. They were doing it before then. It's been the same forever. The same sorts of problems resurface continually, the same characters, the same behavior in response to. I mean, people right now are worshiping an idol. I mean, how do you think new gods came into being in the past? It's like fear. Like think about this. Whatever you fear, that's your god.
Yeah,
that's true. Like, they feared famine, so they had a fertility god. They feared being conquered, so they had a war god. They feared sickness, so they made disease itself into a god, like a personified god, and you had to appease it.
Yep.
Right? Or it would get you.
Yep.
And so they've made COVID into a deity. They fear it so intensely, they've sort of made it a tulpa, like a mind force now. Mm-hmm. They've like a semi-conscious entity that must be appeased.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same story forever. It's not like 1984 rings true now because it was true then when it was written.
And Brave New World is familiar now because Huxley was writing about what he saw in his time. It's the same story. People are like, oh, it's predictive programming. Oh, they told us what they were going to do. Oh, look, see here. It's like, no, that works because it's the same story forever on repeat. You know, that's right. Both comforting and also like depressing.
The only thing that really changes is how many people are aware of it and at what age they become aware of it.
Yes. The only thing you can change is your own enlightenment, which is what this show is for. He also goes on directly after this. He says, so it was with the cold vaccines that were popular some years back. Did you know that there used to be cold vaccines for the common cold? No one does. They never bring this up anymore. This is why you have to read old books, because you find that everything's been tried. And this is how you know what's going to happen. Like I was telling people, like, look, the vaccines are going to seem fine, but I'm telling you they're not going to be worth anything. And gradually I'm being shown right. And it's because we've played this before. I already know how it ends. We've done this. We tried to make vaccines for coronaviruses, the cold, before, and it did not work. And yet...
When did this happen? What?
Huh?
When did these cold vaccines happen? This is blowing my mind.
In the 30s and 40s.
Oh, man.
And they tried this because they were given for years, and people said they're effective, and then they realized, oh, they're not. They don't do anything. It just so happens that colds cure themselves. And once they had enough data and the panic had resided about it, and the people were sort of like looking at things in a more clear-eyed way, like, oh yeah, they could admit it to themselves. Just like they're slowly admitting to themselves that nothing they're doing is working. Like the New York Times published the other day that those barriers you put up at the cashier register don't do anything.
Make it worse. Actually.
And they may make it worse. And that's been obvious the whole time that they're not doing anything. Because think about it. We live in an ocean of air.
Yeah.
We live in a fluid. If you pee in a pool, it will go everywhere over time. If you have virus particles and they're just going to be in the air. That's what it is. You can't like putting a shield as though you're defending against like a sword is stupid. It doesn't make any sense. It's just done in panic. But all the science says it's good, and then when it's not panic anymore, the science says it's not, because the science is this dumb stuff. It's this statistics.
Yep.
Right? And that's all it's ever been. That's all it will ever be.
The actually well-designed tests, and most of them were done before COVID and all this stuff, about disease control, they all found, they tested masks, they tested hand washing, they did all this stuff. The good studies, the ones that actually had good methods and had significant results, the only thing that ever worked was ventilation. Yeah. Just get the air out of the building. And today, that's still the only thing that works, is good ventilation. If you don't want to get sick, ventilate. But that's the one thing we didn't do. That's the one thing nobody did. Because the asthma
theory is actually true.
Right. It's like that. Yeah, the air is bad. The air is actually bad. So get it out of the building.
Right. The air is bad. Get it out of the building.
That's the one recommendation that was not pushed by the government was ventilation.
Yeah. But so they tried vaccines for the common cold. It did not work. Just like flu vaccines do not work, even though right now we're still under the illusion they do. But in some decades, they'll say, "Oh yeah, that failed. That was a silly." But people will not remember, just like they don't remember they already tried curing the common cold and it did not work. They already tried and it did not, like nothing. It didn't work. But that will not impede anyone in any way, because the story must march on the same, right? It just has to. This is why this is why demons can tempt people so well. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is do what worked the last 1,000 years.
Yeah.
They never have to come up with anything new, because people just are the same. The next method is much ado about practically nothing. So like this is an IQ test, which I know a lot of right-wing people get really twisted about. Let's say you have two children, Peter and Linda, right? And you do a good test, and Peter's IQ is 98 and Linda's is 101. And you say, looky there. And of course 100 is supposed to be average or normal. Normal. You say, oh, okay, my son Peter is a little below average and Linda's a little above, right? And again, he says, quote, now, the mental test of any variety is one of the prime voodoo fetishes of our time, so you may have to argue a little to find out the results of the test. This information is so esoteric it is often held to be safe only in the hands of psychologists and educators, and they may be right at that. The 1959, they're also as paranoid about the results of IQ tests. It's the same script forever. I can't stress that enough. Nothing is new under the sun is the most true passage in the Bible. Everyone has been operating the same since the dawn of time because that's just humans do not change. So you say, okay, well, Peter's a little below average, Linda's a little above. That conclusion is total nonsense. Because why? Well, you have error bars in this test. Like, let's say you were trying to measure a field, right? And you want to measure a 100-yard field or whatever. And you do it several times, and you find that your error is that sometimes an actual 100-yard field, you know it's 100 yards, and you're going to measure it to see how good your measuring is. And you will sometimes, using your technique, measure 97. Sometimes you will measure 103, and sometimes you'll measure between those. So you say, it's 100 plus or minus 3 yards, or every 3%. I'm 3%
right.
off, plus or minus, right? And they have the same in IQ tests. Like, we know what something is, and we'll measure it, but we have some error bar, like this is the number, plus or minus 5% or whatever, right? So if you do IQ tests on people, they'll find they have about that 3% thing. And so what the actually should say is that Peter's indicated IQ may be more fully expressed as 98 plus or minus 3, and Linda's as 101 plus or minus 3. Now, people think that what this means is that Peter's IQ is definitely between 95 and 101. And Linda's is definitely between 98 and 104. Right? That's what people think that means.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that in the slightest. When you give that number, when you say it's 98 plus minus 3 with an IQ test, what you're actually saying statistically is that there's an even chance it falls in that place or doesn't. So what we're saying is we are 50% confident that Peter's IQ is within the range of 98 plus or minus 3. But it's equally likely that it's more or less than that. That's what that actually means statistically. And people don't know this because people don't understand statistics. Because statistics is hard. And so people make stupid things. So what that actually means is that because there's 50% chance it falls within that range, there's a 25% chance that Peter is anywhere beyond that. That could mean he could be 120, 130, and there's 25% chance he's greater than that range. 25% chance so when you say, oh, Linda is more, like, it's a complete nonsense conclusion. You just don't know people that talk about these things in IQ are often revealing their lack of IQ. Because they don't know they just don't know what they're saying. And so when people give you these error bars, what they're saying is not 100% certainty it's within these error bars. What they're saying is 50% certainty it's within these error bars, but 50% equally likely it's outside of it. Now, that isn't useless. It's nice to know that we have a range where we can be somewhat confident something lies in. But you also have to know that that's not ironclad, and people pretend that it is.
So I guess the judging the result of that test, you should say we don't really know which one of the two kids is smarter.
You have no idea at all.
They're probably similar in intelligence.
We're 50%. You can say that we're pretty confident they're close to the same intelligence, but there's a 25% chance they're wildly different.
Right.
Which is not saying a whole lot. Right? And so this is a problem that comes up when you are measuring things that are close. Minor differences become exaggerated in the data, in the statistical data. It's like Bayer, Bayer, the medicine. No, what is that? What's that? It's like aspirin, but it's not. It starts with a B. Am I right, Bayer?
Yeah, Bayer.
Yeah,
it's a pharmaceutical and chemical
Remember
company.
how they used to tout how they were preventing heart attacks? They may still do that.
Yeah, low dose aspirin.
Yeah, the statistical significance that they were using to base that on
is actually less than the Princeton Paranormal Research Division had when they were proving the effects of psi. That's not a lie. That's 100%. There was more statistical evidence that people could sit in front of a swinging frictionless pendulum and slow it down with their brain than there is that Bayer prevents heart attacks. But using this same sort of because you see it's the comparing the close things, and so actually, I think that Bayer study comes from that versus Advil or something. It was something crazy. It's like if you take Bayer, and the fact is the two methods did almost nothing different, but they just like this Linda and Peter thing. Like, well, we measured 102, so, but it really means that when the actual difference is less than the guys trying to stop a pendulum with their mind, which they could actually do a little bit. Just putting that out there. We'll have to go through a whole show about that. But people used to sit in front. They did very rigorous studies where they'd have a pendulum swing, and people that could sit there and like focus on trying to slow it down with their mind would stop it within milliseconds faster than normal. And you think, oh, that's nothing, except they did it thousands of times.
Interesting. So,
anywho, the fifth method, I'll go through the other was here real quick, is the G-Whiz graph. I think people are familiar with this one now, where you make the graph look like more than it is.
Oh, yeah, just change your scaling.
Change your scaling. That people do that one all the time. That one's not. There's also like the one-dimensional picture. This was a big one. So let's say you want to represent how much money people in America earn versus people in Mexico, and you find that the average worker in America earns twice as much, right? And you could put that in a bar graph, and that would be fine. You can have a bar graph where one bar was twice as big, but that doesn't really draw readers. It's like, yeah, okay. People in America get twice as much money. What if you had a bag of money, like a pictograph, and that you gave the Mexican guy in your graph a little bag of money, and he has a sombrero on because we're still racist, and the other guy is a white guy, and he has a bigger bag of money, and you make it twice as high. You say, well, that's fair, except that when you draw it, to get the proportions right, you also make it twice as wide. You see? And so now, by area-wise, it looks like it's 4 times as big.
Right, yeah.
People do this anytime there's a graph with little pictures of like cows and how much beef you consume, or like people and how much energy they live, or like money and its money bags or coins, that is always a trick they're using. Anytime. Because not only because it's a one dimension, like you're measuring in one dimension. You're saying, well, he makes twice as much, and I made the bag twice as high, so it's technically true. Yeah, but you made but it would look weird if you actually made the bag twice as wide, also, and then also because it's 2D, it's a 2-dimensional picture, and in our heads, money bags are obviously 3-dimensional. You're actually imagining it having more width as well, more depth, and so then you're saying, well, in your mind, it's like visually, it looks like he's got 8 times as more.
Yep.
And this is what it turns, and this is how they do this. They do this all the time with like men and women's supposed pay gap, which is nonsense. But anytime you get these little graphs with these pictures, you always have to watch out for that one, because those you say twice, like in the data, but the visual impression that everyone gets is eight times. And so in the article, they'll say if you read the numbers, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's twice as much. But visually, you'll get the impression that it's 8 times as much, and people go off visual impressions far more than they do off reading, right? And in fact, Newsweek magazine was guilty of doing that in his time, and he gives several examples. So again, nothing is new. Also, there's the semi-attached figure we talked at the beginning, which is where if you can't prove what you want to prove, demonstrate something else and pretend that they're the same.
Yeah.
It's a very common one. Hardly anybody will ever notice. The semi-attached figure is a good device you can always have in your back pocket if you want to fraud people. For instance, if you can't prove that your thing cures colds, but you can publish a sworn laboratory report that half an ounce of your stuff killed 30,000 germs in a test tube in 11 seconds,
There you go.
There you go.
There you go.
That's an in vitro study.
Right. Make sure the laboratory has a very impressive name and stuff.
Yep.
And put a doctor in a white. But I mean, it's not your fault that the antiseptic that works well in a test tube may not work in a human throat, especially after it's been diluted enough to not burn the tissue off of the person with water. Because if you put pure concentrated stuff in a test tube directly on the virus, I might think it might have a different effect than if you dilute it with water so a person can ingest it and it washes over their throat in a matter of milliseconds.
Yep.
But see, you just prove something else and then you pretend it's the same. People do this with COVID every single day right now. They prove something else and they say, and this is why we have to do this thing. And people go, oh, I guess so. And you say, wait a minute, you didn't prove that at all. You know? That's a big one. So that's the semi-attached figure that comes up all the time. That was used in cigarette advertising in his time. You know, it was widely advertised that 26% of doctors use this cigarette. Well, it's fine, but what does that have to? That just proves that 26% of doctors use that cigarette. That doesn't mean that the cigarette's good for you or better than others. It just means
it's popular among doctors.
It just means it's popular among doctors. People imply it's the Satan thing. It's like they tell you this and then let your mind imply the rest.
Right. Yeah.
Did you tell yourself your own story?
They also drive Mercedes. Are those good for your health too?
Right. This is why I was telling people it's like you make it like it's. This is what I mean by this. You're always living into the reality that you're making for yourself. And that's not like me being like the secret person.
Right.
This is just what it is, you know? So anyway, there's this book, How to Lie with Statistics. There's more tricks in there. People should read it. It's by Daryl Huff. And again, it's from the 50s, and everything in there is still 100% valid because everything's always valid because nothing ever changes. And people are just doing the same thing over and over again forever, and they still don't know where eels come from. And they, you know, just like Aristotle didn't know where eels came from, we still don't know where eels come from. And people are still worried about it.
Do you think anybody will do a study running a correlation on severity of COVID symptoms versus prior beliefs about how serious a disease it is?
Oh, for sure. And that'll be done like 20 years from now.
Yeah, right.
When the panic is stopped. It's
right.
Just like this is the important thing. If you learn to see the spell in the moment,
yeah,
it saves you a lot. Because once the spell is broken, like no one cares about Me Too anymore. Like a year ago, that was a big thing. And if you criticized it, you'd get banned on social media, fired from your job. And now you can be like, hey, you know, that's pound Me Too. Wasn't that silly? People are like, ha! Because the spell has broken, right? The spell is no longer operative. So people realize that it's stupid to just believe anything a woman says at any given time for any reason.
Especially during a moral panic.
Yeah, people realize that that's dumb. And just like that, people don't care about black people anymore. They're like, listen, this vaccine passport in America is going to, in New York City, only 20% of young black people have taken it. So you're basically segregating out the black population from the gymnasium and the restaurant.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but that's not racist.
They don't care. Yeah.
Because they had an equal opportunity to do it. And they said, but I thought you said that they couldn't get driver's licenses.
Right.
That they can. That they can get the vaccine. But it's like, no one cares because the spell is broken and we're on to a different spell.
Yep.
And so in the moment, people are so upset. But then you just, like, I know, I'm confident that maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty confident that in like 6 months' time, the panic over the COVID passport spell will have broken and people will realize it's stupid and they'll drop it because it's not helpful in any way. It's hard to implement And now I know they're going to push it real hard because they really want it. So maybe that'll overcome because they really want like social credit score system and whatever. Maybe they'll get it through. But I think the spell is going to be broken for the average person, especially as they are forced to admit the lack of efficacy of it as time goes on, and the side effects become less hard to deny. And again, it's not like most people drop dead but more people drop dead than you should really be comfortable with for a vaccine.
Yep.
That's the problem.
We canceled the swine flu vaccine over much less than we're
you canceled the swine flu, but it's all just a moral panic. And so no one cares about racism anymore. No one cares about, and they will again, like these things. I mean, Frederick Douglass was talking about race hustlers in his time and complaining about them. It's always the same bit. I mean, people used to you've heard the Black Legend, which was the 1500s, basically anti-Spaniard bigotry, where everyone hated Spaniards for like 100 years because they were all, I think they were all sort of thinking that if they talked to a Spaniard, they were going to throw them to the Spanish Inquisition.
Okay.
Or whatever. And so this people, and I think maybe the Catholic Church at one time formally apologized to Spain for hating on them so much. I'm not sure about that one. I could be thinking of it. Don't quote me on that one. But they don't care about racism at all. Like, in fact, now the vaccine takes up everything. Did you see what Ari Melber, the MSNBC anchor, said?
No.
Just yesterday, he went, listen, or maybe the day before yesterday. He said this on air on NBC to try and convince black people to get the vaccine. Quote, not a joke. COVID is dangerous. It's lethal. It's a bit like the beef Notorious B.I.G. used to rap about.
What?
Quote, beef is when your mom's safe up in the streets. Beef is when I see you, guaranteed to be in the ICU. Well, when COVID sees you, you can end up in the ICU. Maybe not the same rate as Biggie's beef, but that's the point about risk. You don't want to test these streets and risk ending up in the ICU. He really said that.
Oh, man.
Like 2 days ago. And MSNBC was fine with it because the moral spell about thinking, first of all, a lot of this tells you these people think that black people are retarded.
This true.
This is why they think they have no agency and everything is done to them, because the people in like New York City literally believe that black people need to be talked to like that. Which is why they think everyone else is racist because
they are. Yeah, right.
Leave that aside. They don't care about even appearing racist anymore because that spell is currently not operative. And right now we're under the COVID spell, and that's all that matters, right? And just like, did you see the Arkansas public health commercial that played on YouTube for a few days before people got mad about it?
No.
So it had a little thing at the bottom. It was Arkansas Public Health, and it was this black guy sitting on the hood of, Tim Dillon talked about this black guy, but it was all over YouTube. Black guy sitting on the hood of his car in a parking lot, and he goes, man, I had to get the vaccine because I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a hustler. I'm out here on these streets, and I can't take no risk. When you're shaking hands with people, meeting people, I can't get. And you're like, what are you really entrepreneuring here? What are we?
Is this like a drug dealer or something?
Yeah, they put a guy and heavily implied that he was a drug dealer. Like, they didn't put him in a suit.
Yeah.
They didn't put him in an office. They put him...
Did he have like a big hat with a feather sticking out of it?
No, but he had baggy jeans sitting on the hood of a car in a parking lot.
Wow.
And this is how they think they're going to appeal to black people to get the vaccine. So, now think if they'd done that a year ago. They'd have all had their lives destroyed.
Oh, absolutely.
But see, no one cares because these are just magic spells that are placed upon people. And while they're under the enchantment of them, they're insane. But then when they disappear, they're like, oh. And so you have to learn to see the magic spell in the moment, and then you no longer are under its sway.
Yep.
But it just takes practice. You're all going to get there.
It's going to be good.
We believe in you, listener.
I do think you should look into the eel thing, and maybe the Earth is the expanding Earth theory is the way to go.
We should do a little more on expanding Earth. That sounds
it's fascinating because everyone's like they put Pangea together and they just close the Atlantic Ocean. You know, they smash them together. But then if you say, but wait a minute, you could do that the other direction too. And then people start to get freaked out because you can't.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? That
is pretty weird.
It's like, I don't know what that means. But yeah. There's a lot of problems. We're going to get through it though. Should we interview the Taliban, or is that a bad idea?
I mean, I don't think it's a great idea, but I'm just the producer here.
What if our next episode is called Taliban Talks? It's just me and you having a conversation with like 5 Taliban members.
I want to interview that.
And all we end up talking about is the Matrix movies.
You're on 4chan. Get that British kid that was in Kabul. Tintin, the little Tintin guy that was in Kabul. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
I want to interview him.
That would be good. We could hit the Taliban on and we could just discuss couscous recipes.
Yeah, there you go. We'll have Taliban cooks.
I bet some of them are pretty great in those caves.